Welcome to another episode of the Liberating Humanity podcast. This is the first Liberating Humanity podcast where I am interviewing somebody else, somebody super, super special this time. I plan to do a lot more like this and bringing on operators, healers, and survivors. And I wanted to start with one of the most reputable, well-known advocates, survivors in the world, bringing on Gloria Masters. Gloria had me on her podcast a number of weeks ago, and I just fell in love with her heart and her story, and I realized that, doing my undercover rescue missions, even putting together Sound of Freedom movie, it wasn't about the operators. It wasn't about the team that went in, a bunch of heroes. It's about the kids. It's about the survivors. It's their story. It's their plight that we need to really understand. And if we're going to fix this problem, then we need to all come together and figure out how to heal all of the children. And this isn't just the ones that are being trafficked, just the ones that are, the 10 million that are being sold into another country and whatnot. We're talking billions of children who have experienced sexual abuse in their own homes many times. And Gloria was trafficked for over 16 years by her family. You would be amazed at how many trafficked children sleep in their own beds at night. So buckle up, hold on. This is going to be an amazing hour in spending some time with Gloria and really getting to know her story, her heart, and what healing looks like for everybody. So, Gloria, thank you. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, well, I feel very honored, and it's all about the kids, Paul, and I think if even one survivor shares their story, it may just help someone who knows of a child being abused to speak out. So that's my hope. And so in the telling of the story, I actually want to give hope to those beautiful survivors out there who struggle, because there's hope.
Yeah.
There's hope.
Well, and what's interesting, Gloria, is I knew about you way before I knew it was you. The hand signal that has gone all over social media and has been promoted as a way that children, if they are being trafficked, can easily send a signal, and hopefully some adults who have seen what it is will be able to respond. And that signal, I didn't realize this until I was reading your bio today. That was something created by you. And I want to thank you for that. I know of an 11-year-old, and I know that there's even more that we haven't even been talking about that was being trafficked, was in a dangerous situation, and she did the hand signal, which is open fist, open hand, thumb in, close the fingers down. That is the signal that you came up with, that children can say, hey, I'm in trouble. I'm being trafficked. And so thank you. Thank you for your effort in spreading that message in a way that can truly, truly help people who are in trouble.
Thank you. And I think too, what we need to understand, Paul, and people don't always get this, children won't tell. I could never have spoken because I was trafficked by my father, taught by my grandmother how to be the best sex slave possible so they could generate as much income as they could. And I was trafficked everywhere, and they made a lot of money out of me. And I was always quite anxious and traumatized and fearful. I would never have said a word because I believed, as people who have been trafficked do, that I would be killed or that someone I loved would be. So I never spoke. But had I had this, I could have used it. So this is deeply personal for me because children don't speak, that's an adult construct. So I think that's really important. If we can encourage adults to stop asking children questions, turn off the voice, notice children's behaviour over their words. That is where the truth lies.
You touched on something that's super important, and that's the fact that those who are abusing the children, the traffickers, are inevitably using fear to control them. I can't tell you how many children that we rescued in our missions that had contact with their own families, but were scared to death of telling them really what was going on. There was a little girl she was 13 years old when she was taken from Mexico City, and she was taken to New York. And the traffickers said, listen, you're welcome to call your parents. Just tell them, hey, I'm with some friends. I just kind of ran away. But if you say anything about what's really happening, we know where your family lives. Your sister will be dead. Your mother will be raped. These are things that these children are like scared to death. In fact, in our own community, I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, and Elizabeth Smart was known worldwide for what happened there. She was taken from her own beautiful, safe house at 12 years old in this nice neighborhood. And less than 2 weeks after she was taken, she was at a party, smiling, happy. Why? Because she was scared. She was so scared of the things that the traffickers were saying to her, that they would do something to her sister, to her mother, to her family, etc. And it was 2 years later that somebody found her. And even then she denied that she was Elizabeth Smart because of the fact that she was being controlled in this fear. And so talk to me about that. You know more than I've seen it secondhand with the missions that I've done. You lived it firsthand for 16 years. What kind of things are put in place to try to keep these kids quiet? I mean, you went to school, right? You could have said something at school. What were they using to control?
Yeah, and look, I think that's really important. Just to contextualize, can I give a little bit of a backstory? Because I think that may help those. Yeah. Okay, so to me, where neglect and abandonment live, abuse will always find a home. So that's really important. And for me, my mother was a narcissist, so she was not interested in anything about me unless I could serve her in some way. My father was a deranged psychopath, so he'd have to be Paul to do what he did. But the reality was that it was child sexual abuse and child sex trafficking from infancy, really. But alongside that, there were also over 100 CSAMs, as in videos made, which the police tell me are now in the States. So there's that horror. I was leased out of a nightclub in our red light district from the age of 11, tucked away in an upstairs room, chained to a bed from the age of 11. So, this kind of trafficking has tentacles, because the more people hear about this and kind of understand there's a child or children available for hire, the bigger it grows. I had many forced abortions on me as a pubescent teen because no one wanted a pregnant child on their hands. So the horror went on, and I'm so lucky I'm alive. And I will always say that with gratitude, because I didn't think I'd make it through. So I think, just to contextualize that, I've been told many times not many people could have survived. And they're right. The difference with me was I always looked to the light. I looked within and I found it. I didn't have any safe adult. So for those kids and adolescents who have been or are being trafficked from their own homes, it may not just simply be trafficking. There's tentacles anything that will generate an income will be used, and the more money they can make, the bigger this is. But in answer to your question, the way they use their power over you is either, it's actually interesting what you say, Paul, it's either through fear, which mine definitely was, because there was physical and psychological abuse, horrendous as well, or manipulation and guilt. And so what these evil people do is they twist it round to, you made me do that. You see what happens? So that then adds another layer on top. So how could I say or try and show someone I was really struggling, although I did, and at school was interesting, when I'd been told, you made me do this. So you see, for a child, we don't have the cognition to understand that actually that's just manipulation and grooming. Does that surprise you?
No, it's sad, but unfortunately you see that kind of behavior everywhere with adults that are, even adults that go through divorce, They don't take the responsibility themselves. They make the children think that for some reason it's their fault, And this is the sad thing, and the reason why so many adults that were, even if they weren't fully trafficked, if they were abused by their father, their uncle, whatever as a child, their abuser makes them feel like in some way it was their fault. In fact, I was talking to one young lady. She was in her 20s and she was trafficked as a child as well. And she said that she felt guilty because it felt pleasurable. And I said, they were evil adults that were abusing you as a child. And that's the problem, is so many times we hold on to some form of guilt as adults, as what happened, especially men. Men are like, that thing that happened to me when I was 8 by my uncle, if I say anything, I feel bad about it, I feel guilty. It'll make me less of a man. No, it won't. You were 8, you were 11, you were 15, and a horrible thing happened from some adult that was taking out his lustful desires on you. And it's sad, but that's the reason why people hold on to that shame and that guilt so long. And you've written so many books to not only help children, but to help teachers and adults, etc., in learning how to help those children heal as well. So I'm super excited about learning more about the healing aspect as well.
Yes, and I just want to touch on shame and guilt because I think you raise a great point. You see, we have to remember that this happened to children when I was a child. Our cognition is not developed. So it's no surprise that the shame sits with us and the guilt sits with us, because that's what we were told. And when you're a child, think about it, Paul, the adult has the power over always. You are taught to respect the adult always. They are right, you are wrong. They are big, you are little. They are smart, you are dumb. Just following through some thinking here. But the point being, we take that through into adulthood, and it's not until we can face into our trauma and what actually did happen that we see that was a ploy. But out of shame and guilt and secrecy and silence, shame takes the gold. It's what keeps us hidden. It's what keeps us silent. It's what keeps us less than. And it's what keeps us damaged and broken. So that's why the foundation I've set up, called Handing the Shame Back, which you came on, is designed for survivors too. Hold your head up. The shame never belonged to you. We hand it back.
I love that. What are some of the key points in Hand the Shame Back?
Well, just that you as an adult survivor of trafficking, and I've had many guests on the show, you are welcome here. You have a safe place to land. You are believed. We stand with you. You would have heard me say this at the end of our interview. I stand beside you. I see you. I stand beside you. I believe you. Because survivors, I know this may surprise you, Paul, but we're often not believed or we're minimised. So what happens when a child tries to speak the first time, if they're not believed, they lose confidence after that.
I see that. In fact, we had so much pushback with the Sound of Freedom movie. People saying, "Oh, this doesn't really happen. This isn't," and it's beautiful to see the global movement that has been inspired by the movie and by people like you who are standing up and using your voice and saying, you know what, this is dark. This is something we don't want to talk about, but we have to talk about this. We have to help people heal. We have to believe that indeed this is happening right underneath our noses in our own backyards. You weren't just sold in some random third world country. You were at one time sold I think in Cairo and other times in New Zealand. And, these are upstanding neighborhoods and upstanding people. And it's happening. It's happening right here in America. It's happening all around the world. And we need to believe the people who say this is, yes. Accept them and love them completely. This is so important. There is nothing that makes that person less of a man, less of a woman, dirty in any way because of what happened to them as a child. Nothing.
You're right. And you've raised some amazing points. You talked earlier about men, and I have the privilege of interviewing just as many male survivors. And I feel for our men, Paul, because you see, even though they're adult men now, they still get responses like, "What are you, gay?" Or, "Why didn't you stand up for yourself? Why did you let it happen?" And the reality is it's that toxic masculine culture which both men and women ascribe to and expect men to be tough, not vulnerable, never show fear or intimidation, never show vulnerability. And the problem is, these are beautiful. I could show you some image of beautiful little 4, 6, 8-year-old boys with the front tooth missing because the second tooth hasn't come in. Where's the power in that body? So I think can you see how systemic this is and how there's layers upon layers? But not on my watch, Paul. I'm going to shout this from the rooftops because I want to save some kids. I don't ever want.
So proud of you.
Oh.
On that note, I have 2 very close friends, both men, that were abused as children. One of them sold, and one of them just severely abused by uncles and others. And they took 2 totally different routes. One of them ended up being gay, and he attributes his preference to the fact that all of his abuse when he was a child, all of his sexual experiences were from men. The other one, who was abused by his uncle, ended up living a very promiscuous life and sleeping with every woman he could possibly sleep with, trying to prove to himself and others that he wasn't gay. And again, both of them ended up with promiscuous behavior and unhealthy relationships throughout their entire life until they were able to heal from that. On the other hand, statistically, 2 out of every 3 people who have been abused as children, 2 out of every 3 end up being protectors. People like you, people like me that say, you know what? No, I'm going to stand up. I'm going to make sure that nobody ever has to go through this. Unfortunately, 1 out of every 3, if not giving the love and the help and the healing that they need, 1 out of every 3 will become a contact offender. will pass on that trauma in some way.
So, Paul, where does that statistic come from?
I've found it on multiple things online. I'm hoping that it's not that high. Here's the thing. The majority of people who've been abused don't ever say anything. And you know this, the average age of somebody coming out and speaking about their abuse is 52 years old. Now, statistically, they talk about this huge percentage of people that are in prison that were abused as children. Bottom line is, psychologically, is super damaging. And that abuse, that abuse that is passed on isn't always sexual. Sometimes it's just verbal abuse or physical abuse or whatever, because if we're holding this trauma, it's going to come out somehow. It's going to come out in low self-esteem, anxiety, depression, anger issues, passing on that trauma, or, promiscuity, whatever. And so healing is the key. And this is why I love your work, is that it's all about healing. It's all about helping people not holding on to that shame and passing it on to the perpetrators that should be holding it in the first place.
Yeah, and look, thank you. It's such a big thing. The week after I interviewed you, I had a child investigator, detective inspector, who interviewed both pedophiles and children. And she said something which stuck with me, and I think you'll relate, Paul. She said, no disrespect to anyone who's had a loved one that was murdered, but she said, Gloria, murder is one and done. Child sexual abuse sustains is over the lifetime of the person. It actually is. Because there are triggers that emerge. It could be the sound of a footstep. It could be a noise behind you. It could be the sight of someone. Suddenly you're back. And I think that's underestimated. And you raised prisons before. Over 65% of prison inmates have experienced some form of child sexual abuse. Over 70% of PTSD sufferers are not Vietnam vets. They're people like me. Okay, you seen the cost yet? Over 85% of rehab facilities are full of people with child sexual abuse at their base. Can you imagine the billions it costs every year in these specific arenas? Suicide rates. Over 55% of suicides in our country can be linked back to child sexual abuse. 90% of our 14 to 15-year-old boys had experienced child sexual abuse. 90%, Paul.
Wow. This is truly an epidemic. And it is
silent epidemic. Yep.
And you're right, it's a silent epidemic because of how few people are willing to talk about it, because they feel that shame and that guilt. Now,
But I want to know what you think of this. Excuse me interrupting you, but I think you'll have Okay. Yes, survivors don't speak, but by far the larger group are those who haven't been abused. Those people don't like talking about it, Paul, because of that cognitive dissonance. They're uncomfortable with it, so they'd rather turn away. To me, that's a group we need to target.
100%. And that was the purpose in putting together the movie Sound of Freedom, is that we needed the billions of people who don't want to have this conversation around the dinner table. Why? Because it's not polite conversation to be talking about child sexual abuse. Well, you know what? We need to talk about it, because otherwise it will become the silent killer. And like you say, there's 90% of these teenage boys that are committing suicide came from a place of child sexual abuse. This is some serious numbers. And it makes me so mad that people that are like, oh, well, I didn't want to go see it because I don't want to think about stuff like that. Well, you know what? Back at the time of the Civil War here in the U.S., there's if you lived back then, and would you stand up against slavery of somebody, enslaving somebody, killing somebody just because they had a different skin? Yeah, I would stand up against it. No, you wouldn't. You would put your head in the sand because you wouldn't want to see that even out of your peripheral, right? We need to stand up as good men and women and say, okay, this didn't happen to me. This is a dark subject, but we need to be talking about it because we need to create an environment for the people who are suffering to come forth and release that pain in a way that is healthy, that they're not going to be judged, that they're going to be embraced and loved and brought into our inner circle of love and healing. That's so, so important. So yeah, I'm 100% agree with you on that. Tell me this, Gloria, you got out. A lot of kids who are trafficked to the level that you were don't. I actually did some missions where we went to some organ harvesting places where these kids that were aged out, so to speak, where that was kind of the last way that they were making money from them, and then they're done. And the life expectancy of somebody who is trafficked for 16 years isn't very high. So how did you get out, and what was that process?
That's a really good question. Thanks, Paul. I think, you see, because I was still sent to school, that saved my life. And although we know, as we've discussed, that children won't speak, but I showed in all of my behaviour, I was screaming for someone to help me and rescue me. I wish you'd been around, Paul. But the point being that no one was picking up what I was putting down, and all the nuns at school and teachers could see was this kid's out of control, but no one ever asked why. And so that helped save me in a way, because at school I was free to be me. And so leading on to your question, my parents, okay, so what happened was at the age of 11, my parents decided to separate, and I was left with my father and brother in the house. Nothing compared to what happened in the 18 months I was left with them. It was so evil. I still wake up sometimes and think, I can breathe, it's okay, I'm safe. But what happened was, after 18 months of living in the house with them, I came home from school early one day and I could hear laughter coming from down the hallway, so I tiptoed down, and there was my father in bed with a woman. I just went into shock, because that was my job, Paul. I was there to service. I was his mistress. Yeah? So here I am at 12 years of age. I'd been there 18 months, and I ran the 5 or so kilometres to my mother's house, and I said, I must have been distraught, because for the first and only time, she said, what's wrong? What's happened? So I told her, and she said she would ring the priest. Now, I think that saved my life, to be honest, because the Catholic priest said, get her out of that house. It's not okay for her to be living with an adulterer. Paul, it was to be years later before I realised, what about the trafficking and the abuse and the attempted murders and the satanic stuff? Really, that's all I can. Anyway, long story short, I was just, you can imagine the relief. It was one of the most magical days of my life. I will never forget it, except for then 24 hours later, my mother told me, you'll still have to go back every second weekend. So can I tell you, that was harder, because for 12 days I was relatively safe, you see. No one was attacking me during the night or selling me. But I had to find the courage and the, fortitude to cope with 2 days, because he made sure I earned that money. So their agreement was until I was 16, right? So the day I turned 16, I wasn't made to go anymore. And I never saw my father again, willingly, ever again. At funerals and weddings I did, but what saved my life was being pulled out of that house and then only needing to go back every second weekend. But, whew.
So what about the
Lucky
justice system? What about the justice system now? Is there...
Okay, what do you think happens when someone like... No, it's great. In New Zealand, we don't have a statute of limitations. But what do you think happened when I went back as an adult in my early 30s to the police and laid complaints against these abusers? The whole family closed ranks. I became vilified, ostracised, accused of lying, accused of attention seeking, always the person that caused trouble, the black sheep. You pick any name, any survivor watching will tell you, yep, I can relate. And so I then lost my whole family. So, Paul, not only did I have the courage to face memories, which you can imagine I didn't want to face, but then lost my whole family and got labelled as evil. Me, evil. So the police said to me, you are... God, you're very believable, Gloria. We don't have a problem. The problem is, though, if we put you in on the stand, we've only got a 6 out of 10 unless you've got another family member that will come over and stand with you and admit it. We don't want to put you through it. So the case never saw the light of day. But you know what, Paul, and to all those beautiful people who have suffered as well, that's okay, because their day will come.
Yeah.
They will have to face into what they did. And look at me, I'm here, I'm helping, I'm saving some kids, and that's what matters to me.
You're victorious. And, I tell people all the time, if somebody cut you off on the freeway and you spend the entire rest of your day furious and mad and kicking the dog and whatever else, that person won. They probably don't even remember they cut you off, right? But instead, if you say, okay, I'm going to deal with this in my own way, they may end up getting in a car accident someday because of their reckless driving, whatever, and focus on healing. I've had a couple very personal experiences, very similar, and they never wanted to take it to the authorities because of the pain they would have to go through. In fact, many of the countries that we've been traveling to with the movie, we've been helping them change policy because it's very, very difficult in many countries for abused children and trafficked children to win in the legal system, because they have to tell their story and be re-traumatized over and over and over again as they're telling it in front of this judge and telling it in front of this police officer, etc. And so, if we can get everything on camera the first time, that should suffice. If I can get the trafficker on camera saying what he's doing to these children, that should suffice. Don't ever make the child go and stand in a courtroom and see their abuser again. So,
Well, yeah, and it's a really good point that you raised that, because I did a few posts over the last couple of weeks of why children don't tell. You know the number one reason, Paul? Because they have yet to see a child tell without being completely re-traumatized or disbelieved. Number two, the burden of proof becomes on them over and over and over again. Number three, the abuser becomes the victim. So people want to know why children don't tell. That's why children don't tell. So our responsibility surely is to make it easy for them to tell.
And sadly, fortunately in your case, your religious leader said, hey, get out of that house because there's adultery going on. Unfortunately, there's abuse within a lot of religious leaders and within the police departments too. I can't tell you how many times we arrested people who were involved with the local police who were involved with the traffickers. And I know that was, that was a challenge for you as well, because
Well, it meant I couldn't freak out because I didn't know who to trust, Paul, because the Freemasons were a very big group I was consistently trafficked to. Now, these are our leaders in media, government, police. And so I would be taken to places over weekends where other children were and where a lot of these powerful men were. And there would be the black and white paddy wagons at the bottom of the long driveway up to the... So the message to me as a child was they can't be trusted. But I need to qualify and say, I'm not saying every Freemason abuses kids at all, but I'm saying the higher up the ranks, there are certain elements. And again, you should hear the names I'm called for daring to expose it. But you know what? I'm not going to live in fear anymore. I'm going to tell the truth because that's all I have.
So proud of you. I'm so proud of you for being strong enough to stand up, because those are some very, very powerful people that are involved in trafficking here in the United States and around the world. And people ask me how high does this totem pole go? You just have to ask yourself who was on the Jeffrey Epstein list, and you'll understand how high this goes. It's sickening, but there's a lot of very influential, very powerful.
Well, I will say this, and I haven't said this on air before, so there's something about you and your style. I'm pretty sure I was trafficked to the Prime Minister of New Zealand in 1966. I was at my grandmother's house and I'd been told some very important men were coming and I had to keep them happy. And if I did, I'd get an ice cream later. So I peeked out the window and this black car turns up with flagpoles on either side of the front of the vehicle. And out of the car emerged 3 men and 2 were bodyguards. They came into the house, Paul, my grandmother's house, and they did a recce, as in they looked around and checked rooms and things. And then I'm pretty sure I put money on it. So there you go. So this is, I feel sick saying it, but I know it's true. So,
the saddest thing about what you just said was how they told you if you kept them happy, you would get rewarded, get an ice cream. Are you kidding me? These poor children, controlled by fear, controlled through manipulation, using their bodies in these horrific ways. It sickens me. This is the reason, this is the reason I decided to dedicate my life to this. How old were you at that?
6 years old. 6.
Sorry, I ask myself this all the time. How does a grown-ass adult with any moral conscience whatsoever think that that's okay? Every single child that I saw that was being trafficked, they would put a smile on their face, pretending like they were happy to be there. But if you look deep, you could see the fear. You could see the sadness. You could see the pain in every single one.
But to be honest, can I give another version of that? Another take on that, please? The smiling I did, it was so they wouldn't hurt me so much. I was trying desperately to have a soft-natured pedophile, and I thought, in my childlike way, if I can be appealing and look happy, he might not hurt me quite so much. But that's why the smile.
Sorry, get all choked up just thinking about your 6-year-old self putting on a smile, hoping that they wouldn't hurt you more than they already were. Whew. Wow. This is, Gloria, I honor you. I respect you. I love you for the woman that you are and the amazing path that you have chosen to bring light and truth and healing to the world. Talk to me about what healing looks like.
So healing, I think the path for me, first of all, had to, as you can appreciate, with thousands and thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of memories, I blocked it. My mind served me really well. And I blocked all of it from the age of 16 to 32, 16 years of nothing. When I turned 32 and my eldest became the age I was when I was first raped, she was 4.5, the memories started flooding. And I did not want to face them, Paul, because they were horrendous. I was terrified. And I was trying to raise 2 small children at the time. But as we know, when the mind is ready, it comes to your attention, the mind will bring it forward. So it was my time to deal with it. So for the next 10, 15 years, I faced into these memories. Now, I'm not exaggerating when I say I didn't want to be here anymore. And I'm saying that because the truth is, when I had to face into what had been done to me, it was too much. I felt, as you can appreciate, did that really all happen? Yes, it did. And the body never forgets. And I remember having to face into those memories and doing all of the therapy, and I did lots of things. I did group work with other survivors. Remember, I lost my family at the time because I dared to tell the truth. I had a therapist I would see. I did lots of journaling. I also had a lot of work to do because for all of us as survivors, our story is different. The biggest impact on me was I became this false self. So think of a masked ball with a mask in front. No one knew who I was. I was happy. I was this. I was everything to everybody because that had been my role growing up and it kept me safe. But as an adult facing into all of it, I had to unpack, and Paul, I didn't know who I was. And so that was really hard for me. Over time, I learned to deal with it more and more. And I remember when I was pregnant with my children and going to a doctor just to give you a little indication of how the body never forgets. And the doctor said to me, "Oh, you've had quite a few miscarriages, haven't you?" And I said, "No." And of course, I'd had many abortions performed, hadn't I? But I hadn't realised that when I was first pregnant with my child. So I'm very grateful I could have children. But the point is, over decades, actually, I spent decades in therapy, and I was still very damaged. You can't go through 16 years of that and not be a complete mess. I chose 2 men to marry who reflected the type of person my father was. So suffice it to say, those marriages ended. And, I think I eventually was able to hold my head up high and write my memoir on Angel's Wings. And I think that is my story, my memoir. And if I showed you this, Paul, I think you would so love it. You'll probably cry, but that's you. You would so love it because it depicts me as the 11-year-old with the angel wings coming down around me. And it's my flight from trauma to grace. So this was told through the eyes of a child, of the 11-year-old, my story. So not the healing, but it focused really on those 18 months I alluded to at the beginning of our interview. And the reality was, once that book went out, it went boom. And that really helped me. It helped me raise my head, and I started doing interviews. And that's when I realised I was holding on to so much shame. And so it was then, probably a year or two after that, I set up Handing the Shame Back as a YouTube channel where I interview survivors. So if your wonderful male friends ever want a safe place to tell their story, I'm very trauma-informed and gentle with survivors, if they would ever.
I would love that. How for our listeners who maybe have been through some of these similar experiences that are ready to share, they're ready to talk about that. How do they reach out to you? Could I have them reach out to me and I can introduce them to you as somebody?
For survivors though, because this will not surprise you, every survivor I know is driven and so productive. So my second book is a resource for survivors called Flight Path to Healing. And what it does, you can see the plane taking off. Each survivor gets a boarding pass because, Paul, they deserve to be honoured. And this book goes through the stages we go through in our recovery and healing, and also the things that are common to us, like hypervigilance, which I described to you, like feeling different. We feel different from everybody else. Like feeling very much that we doubt ourselves, because from childhood up we're told you're lying or you're making this up, or he wouldn't do that to you. And at the end of every chapter I've got these wonderful mantras which can be perforated and removed, so they acknowledge the beautiful survivor reading them. But this, I've been told by survivors of trafficking, and it ends with, you're going to love this, it ends with a child sexual abuse survivor degree, because to me these people deserve to be honoured. And again, this is perforated and cardboard, but it's to honour the life that was taken. And so I've been told survivors, this is being given to people who have been trafficked and have come back and said it's really helpful. And I think because I've been through it, I can understand.
Well, and there's so much power that comes in, number one, just admitting that those things happen, because that's the first step to healing. And, back to earlier in our conversation where, a percentage of people that pass it on, the percentage of people who actually talk about it and those never pass it on is very, 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 very seldom, because just talking about it is that first step of healing and moves you into that role of the protector of innocence, and in just sharing your story is saving children, is helping other people be willing to share their story and read the books and find a path to healing. And there are so many tools out there that can help people move forward. But the first one is just being in a place where you can be open and you can talk about it. Our family members who had been through it, there was so much healing that happened by just being able to talk about it, and in a safe place where you're loved just as you are. knowing that there's nothing dirty about you. There's nothing to feel guilty for. There's nothing sinful that happened.
You were a child.
You were innocent.
Can I just show you my third and final, because this is the book that's taking off, and I think this is why I'm doing right.
Yes. I would love you to show it.
So this is Keeping Kids Safe. This is a roadmap for parents, teachers, and others, and you'll see the GPS markers. So it's very straightforward. But what this book does, it focuses on signs to look for as one chapter. What to do if a child discloses is another. Tools for parents. Tools for children. The signs of sexual abuse. There's a lot of people out there who are not sure about what is going on. So that cognitive dissonance we talked earlier about keeps them quiet. But this, sorry, Paul, we don't have the luxury anymore of thinking this doesn't happen. This is a global, silent endemic, and it's time for people to take charge. Please look at this. This book's already won a couple of awards. And I'm not even saying that with ego. I'm just being honest. And I think it's because it's practical, and at the end of each chapter is a checklist. So if you think, oh, Gloria, I know all about tools for children, you just simply go to the end of that chapter and there's a checklist for you. And then you tick the ones that you may want further information on. That's it. And your checklist at the end of each chapter creates your roadmap. So, Paul, your roadmap is going to look different to mine. But isn't that the beauty of it?
I love it. Well, and like you were saying, Gloria, you were going to school and you were screaming help in your own way, but nobody knew the signs. Nobody knew what to look for. Everybody thought that you were just acting out. And if we can help teachers, educators, even other parents in the community to be able to recognize some of those signs, we can save millions of children. In fact, we're going to put a links on this podcast, but also on the Liberating Humanity website itself. We partner with people who have resources, and we're going to have links for people who can buy your book. We may even buy a bunch of them and offer discounts to educators if you can show that you're a teacher, and that we will help to subsidize the cost of that book for you, because I think this is so important. This is so important for parents, for educators, for church leaders to recognize these signs, not just thinking, she's 12 years old, she's going through these hormonal changes. No, there's probably a lot more going on than just hormonal changes and based on some of these signs. So I'm excited to read your book, and I'm excited to help you promote it as a tool for change and healing.
I would be so humbled if you could do that. If even one parent or teacher sees that, it's going to inform them. And that's all we need, is for people to be informed. And, we have our Ministry of Education here in New Zealand who have said this book should be in every home in our country. So I think let's save some kids. Can I just read you one of my quotes? Whose job is it to protect children, she asked. Not mine, said one. Not my problem, said another. The question then becomes, if not you, then who?
It's true. Yeah, it's the question I had to ask myself when I witnessed child trafficking for the first time. I had to ask myself, why me? Why was I put in this place? I have this beautiful life of opulence and luxury, and I'm doing well. I'm building a company, got lots of employees. I realized that that's the reason I needed to see it, is I needed to use my connections and my resources to fight this evil, because I don't think there's anything worse. I served on countless different boards of directors and donated time with countless different foundations that were helping children in different ways. Some of them were, children that were struggling with life-threatening illnesses or cancer, or children that were in the hospital, etc. Honestly, if I had a 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 11-year-old girl, boy right now, I would rather have them struggling with some of those issues than being sold and trafficked. There's nothing worse. There's nothing worse than I can imagine. And as you pointed out earlier, no disrespect for those who have lost a loved one to something horrific, but they've passed on. They're on the other side. They're in a beautiful place. Somebody who has dealt with child sex trafficking has to hold that pain, and it affects every single day of their lives. And so we need to change how we see this as a society and not be apathetic about it. This is the purpose of bringing the movie, is to somehow create some degree of awareness so that good people everywhere could start talking about this and say, what can we do to help? The worst thing you can do is go to Colombia and try to go rescue kids. You're going to get shot. The best thing you can do is go buy Gloria's book, because you're going to learn some things that can help the children stay safe in your life, in your community. So I'm super excited to help promote that to our audience and the good people everywhere who are wanting to make
it's so simple, and people are so scared of this, Paul. And I just want to raise this. People are uncomfortable with hearing this topic discussed. I feel uncomfortable and a bit triggered by talking about it. But hang on. How do you think the child feels? Can't we at least do this for the child? That's our priority. You'll know, Paul, and I see it all the time. People say, yeah, we've got to do something, and then they do nothing. It becomes a conversation piece. So this is a bit of a call to action, and I'm so glad I met you, because I think, come on, people, if you see a child do that, and the hand signals all through the book, Paul. Hashtag hand sign for kids is my hashtag. If you see a child do that, don't turn away. If you're feeling uncomfortable, just take a photo or follow the child. Notice the car they get into. Take a photo with a number plate. Do something, please. We don't have the luxury of pretending this doesn't happen anymore.
100% agree. Gloria, thank you. Thank you for not only taking the time to spend with my audience, but thank you for taking a stand and being brave enough to face your accusers and to go public with something that so many people just hold in shame for the purpose of helping so many other people heal. I honor you. I respect you. I appreciate you. I love you. Thank you for spending this time with us. This has been the Liberating Humanity podcast. I'm Paul Hutchinson, your host, and today we had the amazing opportunity to spend some time with Gloria Masters, who was trafficked for over 16 years by her own family. What a beautiful story of light and love and hope. And my ask to all of you is to click on the links here in the podcast. Find a way to get a hold of her books. If you have been trafficked, if you've had these horrific things happen to you and you want a platform to be able to share, reach out to me. We can talk about it here on the Liberating Humanity podcast, or you can even be on Gloria's as well. And her books, go online. Where can they find you? I'm going to put the links in thing, but where can people?
So gloriamasters.com.
gloriamasters.com.
And also Amazon, depending on what part of the world you're in. They're in all versions, but I would encourage paperback or ebook version rather than audio, and simply because you need the companion guide with the audio, which takes away the joy of just listening.
Wonderful. Yeah, sometimes just listening, you get part of it, but if you can go through the workbook those little checklists that you have, that's going to make even a bigger difference in helping us be aware and helping us save more kids.